On the most important day of her life, everything seemed perfect. Until it wasn't. Just as she was about to walk down the aisle, her loyal dog did something no one expected, blocking her path in front of all the guests. Confused and stunned, she had no idea what was about to unfold. But what happened next changed everything in ways she never imagined. Was it a warning? A sign? Or something even more shocking? Stay tuned to find out, and don't forget to subscribe. Let us know in the comments, what would you do in her shoes? The morning sunlight streamed through the sheer ivory curtains of Evelyn Carter's bedroom, casting a warm, golden hue across the polished oak floors. A soft breeze filtered through the slightly opened window, rustling the delicate lace trim of her wedding dress, which hung near the full-length mirror. Today should have been the happiest day of her life. Evelyn sat at the edge of her queen-sized bed, her fingers nervously tracing the embroidered hem of her silk robe. The weight of anticipation pressed heavily on her chest, yet beneath it, a nagging unease twisted in her stomach. She exhaled slowly, trying to shake the feeling off. This was just pre-wedding jitters. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. She had meticulously planned every detail of her wedding to Nathan Sterling, the charming and successful attorney who had effortlessly swept her off her feet 2 years ago. Their first meeting at a high-profile charity gala had felt like something out of a movie. He had been confident, charismatic, and utterly captivating. From that night on, their relationship had seemed like a perfectly scripted romance, leading up to this moment. Yet, as she gazed at the gown in front of her, the excitement she should have felt was shadowed by something else, something she couldn't quite name. A low, steady breath from the other side of the room pulled her from her thoughts. She turned her head and found Ranger, her loyal German shepherd, lying near the foot of the bed. His amber eyes were locked onto her, unwavering and alert. Evelyn smiled softly, running a hand through his thick fur. He had been with her for 6 years, through heartbreaks and triumphs, never wavering in his devotion. But lately, something about him had changed. Ranger had always been a protective companion, but ever since the wedding plans had begun to take final shape, his behavior had grown peculiar, especially around Nathan. He had gone from cautious to outright distrustful. It had started subtly. A stiffening of his posture when Nathan entered the room, his ears twitching at the sound of his voice. Then came the quiet growls, barely perceptible, but enough for Evelyn to notice. At first she had laughed it off, dismissing it as simple jealousy. But as the weeks passed, Ranger's unease only intensified. He would position himself between them whenever Nathan reached for her, his body tense, his eyes fixed on him as if waiting for something to happen. On more than one occasion, when Nathan leaned in to kiss her, Ranger had let out a deep, guttural sound. Not a full snarl, but a warning. Nathan, always the composed and rational man, had waved it off. "He's just overprotective," he had said one evening, shaking his head as he reclined on Evelyn's couch. "Maybe it's time we set some boundaries." Evelyn had frowned at that. Boundaries? He had offered a smile, one of those perfectly crafted, reassuring smiles he always wore when convincing her of something. "Just until the wedding is over. He seems tense. Maybe having him stay somewhere else for a little while would help." Evelyn had hesitated. The idea of being without Ranger, even temporarily, made her stomach twist. But Nathan had been so reasonable, so understanding. "I'm not saying forever," he had added, "just for a bit." She had reluctantly agreed. Yet, that very night, she had woken to find Ranger standing at her bedroom door, his body rigid, his ears perked. He hadn't moved, even when she had called him. Something wasn't right. Now, as she sat in her bedroom, the memories of the past few weeks gnawed at the edges of her mind. She reached for the delicate lace of her wedding dress, letting the intricate patterns slip through her fingers. The fabric was flawless, exquisite, just like the life she had built with Nathan. So why did it feel like something was unraveling beneath the surface? A sharp knock at the door made her jump slightly. Ranger's ears pricked up, his body going stiff. "Evelyn?" A familiar voice floated through the wood. It was Lauren, her best friend and maid of honor. Without waiting for an answer, Lauren stepped inside, sunglasses perched on her head, a steaming to-go coffee in one hand. "Well, don't you look like a glowing bride-to-be?" she teased, though her eyes quickly flicked over Evelyn's face with quiet assessment. Evelyn mustered a small smile. Morning. Lauren set her coffee down on the nearby dresser and crossed her arms. All right, spill. You look like you haven't slept in days. Evelyn hesitated, glancing at Ranger, who was still watching the door as if expecting something or someone to burst through at any moment. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's nothing. Just nerves. Lauren arched a skeptical brow. Uh-huh, and I suppose Ranger's been acting all weird for no reason, right? Evelyn swallowed. He's just being protective. Lauren tilted her head. Or maybe he's picking up on something you don't want to admit. Evelyn opened her mouth to respond but stopped short, because deep down she knew Lauren was right, and that terrified her more than anything. The wedding was in a few hours. Guests were arriving, Nathan was waiting, everything had been planned down to the finest detail, but something was wrong, and Ranger knew it. Evelyn just didn't know if she was ready to face what that meant. The morning sunlight had shifted, casting long slants of light across the wooden floor as Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. The rich aroma lingered in the air, mingling with the fresh scent of early autumn drifting in through the open window. It should have been a moment of peace before the chaos of the wedding preparations resumed. But peace was the last thing she felt. Ranger lay at her feet, his massive frame stretched out yet still holding a tautness in his muscles. His ears flicked at every sound, his amber eyes scanning the quiet apartment like a sentinel on high alert. Evelyn reached down, running her fingers through his thick fur, feeling the warmth of his presence against her skin. "You're not yourself lately," she murmured, watching as his ears twitched slightly at her voice. "Is it the wedding?" Of course he didn't answer, but the deep exhale he released made something tighten in her chest. His behavior had escalated over the past few days. What had once been subtle tension around Nathan had now turned into full-blown unease. He had started placing himself between them every chance he got. If Nathan tried to hold her hand, Ranger would stand, his body a silent barrier. When Nathan kissed her, Ranger would let out a sound, low, warning, unrelenting. And then there had been last night. She had been just about to drift into sleep when a growl, deep and guttural, ripped through the darkness. It had jolted her upright, her heart hammering. Ranger had been standing at the bedroom door, his eyes locked on the hallway beyond. Nothing had seemed out of place, yet he had refused to move. Evelyn had turned on the bedside lamp, the soft glow casting long shadows across the room. "Ranger?" she had whispered, sliding out of bed. He didn't react to her voice, his focus entirely on whatever was outside her room. Her pulse quickened as she stepped closer, peering out into the dimly lit hallway. The apartment was silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the living room wall. She had checked the locks, finding them secure. Nothing was out of place. Yet Ranger didn't relax. He remained by the door, his muscles coiled, his body tense. He stayed there the entire night, refusing to budge. Now, in the light of day, the memory of his reaction sent a shiver down her spine. A sharp knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Ranger immediately lifted his head, his ears rigid. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She hesitated before rising, making her way toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw Nathan standing on the other side, dressed sharply as always, his dark blue dress shirt crisp, his expression calm and composed. She unlocked the door and pulled it open. "Nathan." "Morning, beautiful," he said, stepping forward to kiss her cheek. She let him, though her body remained stiff. As he moved past her into the apartment, Ranger stood up. His tail remained still, his posture guarded. His amber eyes tracked Nathan's every move with an intensity that made Evelyn's skin prickle. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. "He's still at it, huh?" Evelyn folded her arms. "He doesn't act this way with anyone else." Nathan let out a small, forced chuckle. "Maybe because no one else is about to take you away from him." The words should have been playful, teasing, but something about the way he said them didn't sit right. Evelyn forced a smile and changed the subject. "Did you need something?" Nathan glanced toward Ranger before shifting his gaze back to her. "I just wanted to check in before things got crazy today. Make sure you're okay." She nodded slowly. "I am." Ranger let out a low rumble of a growl, not aggressive, just a sound. A warning. Nathan stiffened for half a second. So quick Evelyn might have missed it if she hadn't been paying attention. Then he exhaled, shaking his head. You really need to do something about that. Evelyn frowned. Do something? He's getting worse, Nathan said, gesturing toward Ranger. I mean, look at him. He's not just protective, Evelyn, he's obsessive. Evelyn's fingers curled slightly at her sides. He's never been like this before. Exactly my point. Nathan stepped closer, lowering his voice. I don't want to start our marriage with this kind of problem. He's not just a pet, he's interfering. A sharp stab of unease twisted in her gut. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. She glanced at Ranger, who hadn't moved, hadn't wavered. He simply watched Nathan with that same unwavering focus. She swallowed hard. I'm not sending him away. Nathan held her gaze for a long moment before finally sighing, forcing another smile. I didn't say that. I just think we should talk about it after the wedding. Evelyn didn't respond. Because she knew, in the deepest part of her heart, that Ranger wasn't the problem. The problem was that she was finally starting to see something she should have seen long ago. And that terrified her more than anything. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the city as Evelyn walked briskly down the bustling sidewalk, the rhythmic tap of her heels drowned by the distant hum of traffic. The air smelled of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe, mingling with the scent of freshly fallen leaves. Normally, this was her favorite time of day, the in-between moments where the city slowed just enough to feel intimate. But today, she barely noticed it. Her thoughts were tangled, looping over the same uneasy feeling that had followed her all morning. She had spent the past 2 years convincing herself that Nathan was everything she wanted. He was charming, ambitious, and knew exactly how to say the right thing at the right time. But Ranger had never trusted him, not from the beginning. And now, for the first time, Evelyn was starting to wonder if she should have listened. She reached the cafe's entrance, pausing to take a steadying breath before pushing through the glass door. The familiar chime above the entrance rang softly. Inside, the scent of espresso and vanilla wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. Lauren was already waiting at a small booth near the window, stirring sugar into her coffee with the casual air of someone who had been expecting bad news. Her wavy auburn hair was pulled up into a loose bun, a pair of sunglasses perched on her head. As soon as she spotted Evelyn, she leaned back in her chair and arched an eyebrow. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, motioning for Evelyn to sit. Evelyn sighed, sliding into the seat opposite her. I feel like I have. Lauren pushed a steaming cup of coffee toward her. Drink first, explain later. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her skin before taking a hesitant sip. The familiar bitterness grounded her, but it did nothing to untangle the knot in her chest. She glanced up at Lauren, who was watching her with the quiet patience of someone who knew her too well. It's Ranger, Evelyn admitted finally. He won't let up. Lauren's brow furrowed. Still acting weird around Nathan? More than weird, Evelyn said. He won't leave my side. He growls when Nathan gets too close, and last night he stood guard at my bedroom door like he was waiting for something to happen. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. And this morning, when Nathan came over, I don't know. Something about the way he reacted to Ranger scared me. Lauren didn't say anything right away. Instead, she leaned forward, tapping her manicured nails against the ceramic mug. Ev, you know how I feel about this. Evelyn sighed. Lauren. I'm serious, Lauren interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. Dogs don't just act like that for no reason. You said it yourself. Ranger has never been aggressive. If he's acting like Nathan is a threat, maybe that's because he is. Evelyn opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. Because the truth was, she had been thinking the exact same thing. Lauren's gaze softened. Look, I know you love Nathan, and on paper, he's perfect. But sometimes, things look good on the surface while something rotten is underneath. Evelyn swallowed, gripping her coffee cup tighter. I don't know what to do. The wedding is in 2 days, Lauren. People have already flown in. My mom is over the moon. If you back out now, you save yourself from making a mistake you can't undo, Lauren said simply. Which is worse, disappointing some guests or waking up next to the wrong man for the rest of your life? The weight of her words settled heavily between them. Evelyn stared down at the swirling patterns in her coffee, her mind racing. Lauren sighed and reached across the table, squeezing her hand. I'm not saying you have to call off the wedding right this second. But Ev, you owe it to yourself to really think about this. And maybe, she added carefully, you need to stop ignoring what Ranger has been trying to tell you all along. Evelyn exhaled slowly. I don't even know what I'm looking for. It's not like I have proof Nathan is hiding something. Lauren hesitated before speaking. Maybe not. But something is off, and your gut knows it. She pulled back, drumming her fingers against the table. And if you're not willing to trust Ranger's instincts, then trust your own. The words struck something deep inside Evelyn, something she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Because deep down, she did know. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The sun had nearly set by the time Evelyn returned to her apartment. The familiar space felt different now, too quiet, too still. Ranger met her at the door, his tail giving the slightest wag, but his eyes were still sharp, still watchful. Evelyn knelt down, rubbing his ears. What are you trying to tell me, boy? She whispered. Ranger huffed, leaning into her touch, but his ears flicked toward the hallway where Nathan's things were kept in the guest closet. She followed his gaze, her stomach twisting. Slowly she stood and walked toward the closet. Her fingers hovered over the handle for a second before she took a deep breath and pulled the door open. Inside, Nathan's suit hung neatly beside a few dress shirts. A leather duffel bag rested on the top shelf. Everything looked normal. But Ranger didn't move. His body was still tense, his eyes locked on the bag. Evelyn hesitated. Then, heart hammering, she reached for it. The moment her fingers unzipped the bag, Ranger let out a sharp breath, as if confirming what she already feared. Something inside told her that whatever she was about to find was going to change everything. The morning of Evelyn Carter's wedding arrived with an eerie stillness. Outside, the sun had barely begun its slow ascent over the city skyline, casting a muted golden hue across the horizon. The streets below were quiet, save for the occasional honk of a distant taxi or the muffled chatter of pedestrians on their early morning commutes. Inside the grand estate where Evelyn was preparing, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The large suite reserved for her and her bridal party was bustling with movement. Steam curled from cups of freshly brewed tea, curling irons hummed, and the scent of expensive perfume mixed with the faint, lingering aroma of vanilla candles. The air was thick with excitement, nervous energy, and a touch of chaos as bridesmaids flitted around, making last-minute adjustments to their dresses and makeup. Evelyn sat in front of an ornate vanity, staring at her reflection. The makeup artist worked methodically, sweeping a soft blush across her cheeks, but she barely registered the brush's gentle strokes. Her wedding gown hung on a padded hanger across the room, a masterpiece of ivory lace and delicate embroidery. It was everything she had envisioned since she was a little girl. Perfect. Flawless. Then why did she feel like she couldn't breathe? Ranger lay curled at her feet, his large body positioned protectively between her and the rest of the room. Unlike the others, he was silent, his amber eyes watching every movement, his ears twitching at the sounds filtering in from the hallway. He had refused to leave her side since she had woken up, his presence grounding her in a way she couldn't explain. A soft knock at the door made everyone pause. Evelyn's mother peeked inside, her eyes instantly lighting up when she saw her daughter in the silk bridal robe. "Oh, sweetheart, you look absolutely stunning," she breathed, stepping in with a hand over her heart. "I can't believe the day is finally here." Evelyn forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, it's here." Her mother crossed the room and smoothed a hand over her shoulder, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I know you're nervous, honey. Every bride gets cold feet." She let out a small, wistful laugh. "I remember feeling the same way before I married your father. But the moment I walked down that aisle, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be." Evelyn swallowed hard. Right. She wanted to believe that. She really did. Before she could dwell on it, another knock sounded at the door, this one firmer, more impatient. "Evelyn, it's me," Nathan's voice called from the other side. "Can I come in?" Instantly, Ranger's body tensed. A low growl rumbled in his throat, deep and guttural. His hackles bristled, and his amber eyes locked onto the door as if something dangerous lurked behind it. Evelyn's mother frowned. "What's gotten into him?" Evelyn's stomach twisted. She reached down, running a calming hand through Ranger's fur, but his muscles remained taut beneath her touch. He didn't relax. He didn't waver. Not before the ceremony, her mother said, turning toward the door. It's bad luck, Nathan. You know that. I just need to talk to her for a second, Nathan insisted. It won't take long. Evelyn hesitated. Her eyes flickered to Lauren, who had been standing by the window, quietly watching the entire exchange. Lauren's expression was unreadable, but her gaze darted toward Ranger, then back to Evelyn, a silent warning in her eyes. It wasn't a good idea, but Evelyn nodded anyway. Just a second, she called out, standing up. Her mother hesitated, then sighed, stepping aside. Lauren didn't move. She remained firmly in place as Evelyn crossed the room, her silk robe whispering against the floor. Ranger shadowed her every step, his growls low but unrelenting. She cracked open the door just enough to see Nathan's face. He was impeccably dressed, his dark suit tailored perfectly to his tall frame, his tie a shade of deep navy that complemented his sharp features. His smile was warm, his eyes soft, but something about them made her stomach clench. I just wanted to see you, he murmured, his voice gentle. I know it's bad luck, but I needed to look at you before everything starts. Ranger's growl deepened, his entire body shifting forward as if he were preparing to lunge. Nathan's gaze flickered to the dog, and for a fraction of a second, so quick Evelyn almost missed it, his jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. Irritation. No, something deeper, something colder. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual easy charm. He sighed, shaking his head. Are we still dealing with this? He murmured. Evelyn stiffened. What do you mean? Nathan let out a small, forced chuckle, running a hand through his hair. Come on, Ev. He's been acting crazy for weeks. Maybe it's time we acknowledge that this isn't normal. Evelyn's fingers curled around the edge of the door. Or maybe, she said carefully, he sees something I don't. For the briefest moment, something flickered across Nathan's face. It was gone before she could fully process it, but it left a cold weight settling in her chest. You're nervous, he said smoothly, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. That's all. It's just wedding nerves. His touch was light, reassuring, but for the first time, she didn't want it. A firm but gentle hand landed on her shoulder, grounding her. She turned slightly and found Lauren standing behind her, her expression unreadable, but her message clear. Evelyn swallowed. Then slowly, she took a step back, out of Nathan's reach. I'll see you at the altar, she said, her voice even. Nathan hesitated for the first time. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Then he nodded, flashing another easy smile. Of course. She closed the door before he could say anything else. Her heart was pounding. She turned to Lauren, her hands trembling slightly. You don't have to do this, Lauren said quietly. Evelyn's breath hitched. She looked down at Ranger, who was still staring at the door, his ears back, muscles coiled. Something was about to happen. She just didn't know what yet. The evening air was thick with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass. Beneath the sprawling canopy of white silk and golden fairy lights, guests murmured in quiet anticipation. The ceremony was set in the heart of an opulent garden, where rows of ivory chairs lined a cobblestone aisle that led to a grand floral arch. Soft instrumental music played in the background, adding to the dreamy atmosphere that Evelyn had so carefully planned. Everything was perfect. At least, that's what everyone else believed. Nathan stood at the altar, the picture of confidence and composure. His tailored black suit was immaculate, his dark hair neatly styled, and his expression unreadable. To the guests, he was a groom eagerly awaiting his bride. But Evelyn, standing just beyond the hedges that marked the entrance to the aisle, saw something else. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't overwhelmed with emotion. He was calm. Too calm. Like a man who already knew the outcome of the game he was playing. Her heart pounded as she clutched her bouquet, her fingers tightening around the delicate stems. Lauren stood beside her, whispering last-minute reassurances, but Evelyn barely heard her. Her vision tunneled, focusing only on Nathan and the way he carried himself with that same effortless charm. Ranger was at her side, his body tense, his ears forward. His breathing was measured, controlled, but there was an energy in him that she had never seen before. His instincts were screaming, and for once, Evelyn wasn't going to ignore them. The music shifted. This was her cue. A deep breath. She took her first step forward. The murmurs of the guests quieted as all eyes turned toward her. Cameras flashed, whispers rippled through the crowd about how breathtaking she looked, how elegant, how radiant. She kept walking. Then she felt it. Ranger tensed beside her. A split second later, he lunged. A snarl ripped through the air, sharp and sudden. Gasps erupted from the crowd as Ranger bolted forward, yanking free from Evelyn's grip. The once serene wedding transformed into chaos in an instant. Evelyn barely had time to react before Ranger collided with Nathan, knocking him back with enough force to send him stumbling. Chairs toppled, guests screamed, and the musicians faltered, their melody dissolving into discord. The officiant took a startled step back, his book clutched tightly in his hands. Nathan hit the ground hard, his expression flickering. Not with fear, but with something else, something darker. "Get that dog off him," someone shouted. But Evelyn didn't move. She couldn't. Ranger stood over Nathan, his snarls deep and menacing, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. But he hadn't bitten, not yet. His warning was clear. One wrong move and he wouldn't hesitate. Nathan's hands pressed against Ranger's fur in an attempt to shove him off. But the moment he did, Ranger's growl turned guttural, his fangs bared, inches from Nathan's throat. And then, for the first time, Evelyn saw it. The flicker of something unfamiliar in Nathan's face. Not the charming, controlled man she had fallen for. Not the smooth, calculated lawyer who always had the right answer. No, this was something raw. Something stripped of its careful mask. Irritation. No, something worse, anger. It lasted only a second, a fleeting break in his facade. But it was enough. Lauren moved before Evelyn could. "Evelyn," she called, her voice sharp with urgency. Evelyn turned toward her, but Lauren wasn't looking at her. She was looking at the crowd. A woman had pushed her way to the front, clutching a phone in her shaking hands. Her face was pale, her eyes locked onto Nathan with unmistakable recognition. "I need to speak to you," the woman said, her voice unsteady. Evelyn's pulse hammered in her ears. The world felt like it had slowed. The gasps of the guests distant, the tension in the air so thick she could barely breathe. Before she could respond, security rushed in. 2 men grabbed Ranger, attempting to pull him away despite his resistance. The moment Nathan was free, he scrambled to his feet, brushing himself off with quick, jerky movements. His entire demeanor had changed, his easygoing charm gone, his body rigid, his jaw tight. "Jesus Christ," he hissed, his voice sharp with barely contained fury. "You need to put that dog down." The words hit Evelyn like a slap. She turned to him, barely hearing the guests still whispering, barely noticing the way security struggled to restrain Ranger. All she could focus on was Nathan, the way he looked at her, the way his mask had cracked just enough for her to see through it. The woman with the phone stepped forward, her hands trembling as she unlocked the screen. "You don't know who he really is," she said, looking at Evelyn. "You need to see this." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Evelyn felt her stomach twist as she took the phone, scanning the screen. Her breath caught in her throat. Messages, emails, documents, evidence of fraud, manipulation, lies spanning years. And worst of all, Evelyn wasn't the first. She wasn't even close. Her entire world tilted on its axis as realization crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Nathan had lied about everything, and Ranger had known all along. She lifted her gaze back to Nathan. His expression had hardened now, his hands clenched at his sides. He saw the truth in her eyes. He knew she knew. For the first time since she had met him, he looked afraid. Ranger struggled against the security guards, his growls rising again. He had never let his guard down around Nathan. Now, Evelyn finally understood why. The air in the garden was thick with tension, an unspoken weight pressing down on everyone present. The guests stood frozen, their expressions shifting between confusion and shock. The only sound that cut through the silence was Ranger's low, guttural growl as he strained against the security guard's hold, his amber eyes locked onto Nathan like a predator watching its prey. Evelyn's heart pounded as she stared at the phone in her hand. The words on the screen blurred together, her vision tunneling as she struggled to process the truth unraveling before her. Fraud, manipulation, betrayal. Nathan had carefully constructed an illusion, and she had been just another piece in his web of deception. Slowly, she lifted her gaze back to him. Nathan was no longer playing the part of the concerned groom. His expression had hardened, his jaw clenched, His hands curled into fists at his sides. He wasn't trying to deny it. He wasn't pleading for an explanation. He was calculating his next move. Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened. "Is this true?" Nathan scoffed, shaking his head with an incredulous chuckle. "You're really going to believe the word of some woman you don't even know over me?" The woman standing beside her, the one who had handed her the phone, stepped forward. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "My name is Julia Grant," she said, her gaze locked onto Nathan. "I was supposed to marry him." A ripple of gasps spread through the guests. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. Julia swallowed hard before continuing. "I found out too late. By the time I realized who he really was, I had already lost everything." Evelyn felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had spent 2 years building a life with Nathan, believing in the perfect future he had painted for her. And now, in the span of minutes, that future had shattered into something unrecognizable. Lauren moved closer, placing a steadying hand on Evelyn's back. "Ev, let's take a second, okay?" But Evelyn wasn't ready to step away. Not yet. She turned back to Nathan. "Tell me she's lying." Nathan exhaled sharply, forcing a tight smile onto his face. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice dripping with forced patience. "She's probably some jealous ex looking for revenge, and now she's ruining the biggest day of your life. Do you really want to let her do that?" The way he said it, the way he twisted the narrative so effortlessly, made Evelyn's stomach churn. How many times had he done this before? How many women had fallen for his carefully curated charm, only to realize too late that it was all an act? Nathan took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Evelyn," he murmured, reaching for her hand. "Think about everything we've built together." Ranger let out a sharp, warning bark, straining harder against the guards. His message was clear. Don't touch her. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She glanced at Ranger, then back at Nathan. And in that moment, something inside her clicked into place. She had ignored every warning sign. She had justified every red flag. She had convinced herself that the doubt in her heart was just nerves, but it wasn't. It had never been. Nathan's mask was slipping. The longer she hesitated, the harder it became for him to maintain his polished exterior. His eyes darkened, his patience thinning. "Evelyn," he said, his voice sharper this time, "you know me." She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I do." His jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." Evelyn met his gaze, feeling a strange sense of clarity settle over her. "No," she said, her voice stronger this time. "I almost made one." A murmur spread through the crowd, the weight of her words sinking in. Guests exchanged uncertain glances, some whispering behind their hands. Her mother stood a few feet away, her expression a mixture of disbelief and concern. Nathan's expression flickered, frustration bleeding through the cracks. "Evelyn, don't do this," he said through gritted teeth. But she already had. She turned to Lauren. "Take me inside." Lauren wasted no time, slipping an arm around her and steering her toward the house. Ranger barked again, thrashing against the guards until one of them finally let go. The moment he was free, he rushed to Evelyn's side, pressing his solid frame against her leg in a silent gesture of protection. She didn't look back. The sound of Nathan's voice calling her name faded as she stepped through the doors of the estate. The moment they closed behind her, the weight of what had just happened crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She was supposed to be married right now. Instead, she had just walked away from the man she thought she was going to spend the rest of her life with. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She felt dizzy, unsteady, like she was standing at the edge of a cliff with nothing to hold on to. Lauren guided her to a chair, kneeling in front of her. "Breathe, Ev," she said gently. "Just breathe." Evelyn buried her face in her hands. The room spun around her, voices muffled as her thoughts raced. Had she really just done that? Had she really just ended everything? A cold nose nudged against her arm. She lifted her head slightly, meeting Ranger's steady gaze. He sat beside her, his tail still, his body pressed against her leg as if grounding her to the moment. He had been right all along. Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of relief and heartbreak pressing against her chest. She wrapped her arms around Ranger, burying her face in his thick fur. He let out a deep sigh, nuzzling closer. Lauren placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing." Evelyn let out a shaky laugh, even as a tear slipped down her cheek. Then why does it feel like my whole world just fell apart? Lauren gave her a soft, knowing smile. Because it did. She squeezed Evelyn's shoulder. But that doesn't mean it wasn't the best thing that could have happened to you. Evelyn exhaled, wiping at her face. The pain was still fresh, still raw, but beneath it, something else stirred. Something that felt an awful lot like freedom. The once picturesque wedding venue was now a battlefield of whispers and stunned faces. The golden drapery and pristine white roses remained untouched, but the atmosphere had shifted from celebration to scandal. Evelyn sat inside the grand estate, still in her wedding dress, her bare feet tucked beneath her as she stared at the floor. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers intertwined, gripping tightly as if letting go would unravel her entirely. The soft murmur of guests outside drifted through the windows, their voices carrying fragments of disbelief, concern, and, for some, thinly veiled amusement. Lauren paced in front of her, arms crossed. "Well, that was the most dramatic wedding I've ever attended," she muttered. "And I once went to a ceremony where the groom's ex showed up pregnant." Evelyn let out a hollow laugh. It didn't reach her eyes. Lauren sighed, kneeling in front of her. "Ev," she said gently, "talk to me." Evelyn inhaled slowly, but the breath caught in her throat. "I feel like I just destroyed everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lauren squeezed her knee. "No," she corrected. "You just saved yourself from a lifetime of misery." Evelyn lifted her gaze, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Then why does it feel like I lost? Because you invested in something that wasn't real." Lauren exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "That's always going to hurt." A gentle nudge against Evelyn's arm made her glance down. Ranger, ever her silent protector, rested his head on her lap, his deep brown eyes steady and unwavering. His presence was a reminder that she wasn't alone, that someone had always been looking out for her. Even when she hadn't looked out for herself, she buried her fingers in his thick fur, finding solace in the familiar warmth. "I should have listened to him," she murmured. Lauren smirked. "Yeah, well, he's a lot smarter than most of us." She leaned back on her heels. "Speaking of which, your mom is handling the fallout." Evelyn groaned, pressing her fingers against her temples. "God, my mom. She's shocked," Lauren admitted, "and humiliated, but I think deep down, she knows you made the right call." Evelyn sighed. The weight of her mother's expectations had always been heavy, and she had spent years trying to live up to them. But for once, she had made a decision that wasn't about appearances, about perfection, about what looked good on the outside. She had chosen herself. A knock at the door made both women stiffen. Before Evelyn could respond, the door cracked open, and her mother stepped inside. Her elegant updo was slightly undone, a sign that the day had taken its toll on even her poised exterior. "I spoke to the guests," she said, her voice measured. "Most of them are leaving. A few are staying for the reception, even though—" She trailed off, waving a hand toward the obvious lack of a wedding. Evelyn braced herself. "Mom, Her mother held up a hand, silencing her. "I won't pretend this isn't a disaster, Evelyn." Evelyn's chest tightened. "But," her mother continued, her expression softening just a fraction, "I would rather deal with this than watch you make a mistake you can't undo." Evelyn blinked. You're not mad?" Her mother sighed, lowering herself onto the chair beside her. "Of course I'm mad. This was supposed to be a perfect day." She hesitated, glancing at Ranger. "But I can't ignore the fact that your dog, who has never led you wrong, saw something in Nathan that we didn't." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "Wait, are you admitting that Ranger was right?" Her mother pursed her lips. "I'm admitting that my daughter is not a fool, and if she felt something was wrong, then I trust her judgment." Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her mother stood, smoothing out the creases in her dress. "Now, I suggest you change out of that gown before you get wine spilled on it. We may not have a wedding, but we still have a very expensive open bar." Lauren grinned. "Now that's the kind of problem-solving I like." As her mother exited, Lauren turned back to Evelyn. "You heard the lady. Time to get out of this dress and into something more fitting for an ex-bride-to-be." Evelyn hesitated, glancing down at herself. The gown was beautiful, intricate, everything she had once dreamed of, but now it felt heavy, like a costume for a role she no longer wanted to play. She exhaled and stood. "Yeah, let's do it." The reception that followed was a strange, surreal experience. Some guests stayed out of obligation, others out of curiosity. A few seemed genuinely relieved to have an excuse to drink without having to sit through a long ceremony. Evelyn, now in a simple but elegant dress, sat at a quiet table with Lauren and a few close friends. She sipped champagne, feeling the alcohol warm her insides, but do little to numb the whirlwind of emotions. Across the room, her mother was speaking with a few lingering guests, her posture regale, her expression unreadable. The scandal of the day would follow their family for a while, but Evelyn suspected her mother would manage it with the same efficiency she handled everything else. At her feet, Ranger remained ever vigilant. He had finally relaxed, though his eyes still flickered toward the entrance every now and then, as if ensuring Nathan wouldn't return. Lauren nudged her. "So, what now?" Evelyn exhaled, watching as guests laughed, mingled, and danced as if this were just another evening party. "I don't know," she admitted, "but for the first time in a long time, I think I'm okay with that." Lauren lifted her glass, to not making terrible life choices. Evelyn clinked her glass against Lauren's, a small, genuine smile forming on her lips, to listening when it really matters. And for the first time that day, she truly believed it. The morning after what was supposed to be her wedding day, Evelyn woke to an unfamiliar stillness. No alarm blaring, no buzzing phone overloaded with messages about table settings, flowers, or last-minute changes. Just silence, interrupted only by the rhythmic rise and fall of Ranger's breathing beside her. Sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains of her apartment, painting soft golden patterns across the hardwood floor. It felt strange to be here, in her own bed, rather than waking up in a honeymoon suite with Nathan. But then again, nothing about yesterday had gone as planned. Evelyn stretched slowly, her muscles aching from the tension that had gripped her for weeks. Ranger stirred, lifting his head to look at her, his deep amber eyes scanning her face as if assessing whether she was okay. She let out a long breath. "I don't know, buddy," she admitted, scratching behind his ears. "I think I will be." Ranger exhaled through his nose and nudged her hand, a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone. Evelyn sat up, running a hand through her hair. The remnants of the previous night still lingered. Half-empty champagne flutes on the coffee table, a discarded pair of heels near the couch, Lauren's jacket draped over the armrest from when she had crashed on the sofa. It had been an impromptu therapy session filled with Chinese takeout, bad reality TV, and a bottle of wine that had mysteriously disappeared in the process. She had expected to feel empty when the exhaustion wore off, expected regret to creep in, to whisper in her ear that she had made a terrible mistake. But instead, all she felt was relief. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a moment, she debated ignoring it, but curiosity won. She reached for it, her stomach tightening slightly when she saw her mother's name on the screen. Taking a steadying breath, she answered. "Mom? Evelyn?" Her mother's voice was unusually soft. "How are you feeling?" Evelyn hesitated, surprised by the genuine concern in her tone. "Tired," she admitted. "But, okay." A pause. Then, "I spoke with some of the guests this morning. The gossip is already spreading." Of course it was. A high society wedding gone up in flames? That was bound to be the talk of the season. Evelyn pinched the bridge of her nose. "I'm sure it is." Another pause. "I'll handle it." That made her sit up straighter. "You will?" Her mother sighed. "Evelyn, I won't pretend this isn't a mess, but you made the right choice. And if there's one thing I know, it's how to deal with people." A rush of gratitude welled up in her chest. For all her mother's flaws, for all the pressure she had placed on Evelyn over the years, she was still her mother. "Thank you," Evelyn said, her voice quieter now. Her mother cleared her throat, shifting back into her usual no-nonsense tone. "Now, what's your plan?" Evelyn blinked. "Plan? Yes. You're not moping around in that apartment for the next month. You need to do something." Evelyn let out a half-hearted laugh. "I just called off my wedding, Mom. Maybe I need a minute." "Fine. Take your minute. Then figure out what's next." With that, she hung up. Evelyn stared at the phone for a long moment before tossing it onto the bed. She knew her mother meant well, at least in her own way, but the idea of thinking about the future right now felt overwhelming. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, stretching her sore muscles. Ranger followed her into the kitchen, his nails clicking softly against the floor as she moved to pour herself a cup of coffee. The rich aroma filled the air, grounding her as she leaned against the counter. What now? She had spent years building a life that revolved around Nathan. Their relationship had dictated her schedule, her plans, even the way she saw herself. Without him, without that future, she felt unmoored. Her gaze drifted to Ranger, who was watching her expectantly, his tail wagging slightly as if waiting for her to figure something out. And then, for some reason, she remembered something. A moment from years ago, before Nathan, before the endless expectations. A time when she had spent her weekends volunteering at an animal shelter, long before life had pulled her away from things that made her happy. Evelyn set down her coffee. Maybe it was time to find herself again. Later that afternoon, Evelyn found herself standing outside the same animal shelter she had once loved. The familiar brick building hadn't changed much, though the sign above the entrance was slightly more faded than she remembered. She hesitated at the door, suddenly unsure of herself. Was this crazy? Walking away from her old life and stepping into something completely unknown? But before she could second-guess it, she pushed the door open. Inside, the scent of clean straw and disinfectant filled the air, mingling with the distant sound of barking dogs. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Hi there, can I help you?" Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "I was wondering if you needed volunteers." The woman's smile widened. "We always need volunteers." And just like that, something inside Evelyn settled. Maybe she didn't have a grand plan yet. Maybe she didn't know exactly what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, she was choosing her own path. And that was enough. Evelyn hadn't expected to feel so at home in the animal shelter so quickly. Days turned into weeks, and what had started as a way to distract herself from the chaos of her failed wedding soon became something deeper. She found comfort in the routine. Morning feedings, walking the dogs, cleaning kennels. There was something grounding about caring for creatures who didn't judge, who didn't whisper behind her back, who didn't expect her to be anything other than who she was in that moment. Ranger had become a fixture at the shelter too. He followed her through the halls, watching over the other dogs with a quiet authority. The staff adored him, and the animals seemed to respect him, almost as if they sensed that he had been through something, just like many of them had. One afternoon, as Evelyn finished refilling water bowls, she passed a row of kennels and noticed a dog she hadn't seen before. Curled up in the corner of his enclosure was an older golden retriever, his fur peppered with silver. Unlike the other dogs who perked up at the sight of her, he remained still, his deep brown eyes cautious but not unkind. His tag on the kennel door read Lucky. Evelyn knelt in front of the bars. "Hey there, buddy," she murmured, resting her fingers against the metal. "What's your story?" A staff member, Maria, approached from behind her. "That's Lucky," she said with a small smile. "He came in a few weeks ago. His owner passed away, and no one in the family wanted to take him. He's been having a hard time adjusting." Evelyn's heart ached at the thought. "How old is he?" 10, Maria replied. "Senior dogs are always the hardest to place. People want puppies, not dogs with a few gray hairs." Evelyn glanced at Lucky, watching as he finally lifted his head, his ears twitching slightly. She knew that feeling all too well, the feeling of being left behind, of having a future you thought was certain suddenly taken from you. She exhaled and turned to Maria. "I'll take him." Maria blinked. "Wait, adopt him?" Evelyn nodded. "Yeah, I will." Maria hesitated, then smiled. "I'll get the paperwork." As Evelyn filled out the adoption forms, Ranger sat beside her, his tail thumping lightly against the floor. She glanced at him. "What do you think, bud? Think we've got room for one more?" Ranger huffed as if to say, "Obviously." Evelyn laughed softly, reaching down to scratch his ears. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The first night with Lucky felt different than Evelyn had expected. After bringing him home from the shelter, she had worried that he wouldn't settle in easily. He had spent weeks in a kennel, adjusting to the loss of the only family he had ever known. Would he feel safe here? Would he accept this new life with her and Ranger? But as she watched him curl up in a soft dog bed beside the couch, his tail flicking gently as he let out a content sigh, she knew she had made the right choice. Ranger lay beside him, his body relaxed but still watchful. He had accepted Lucky almost instantly, as if he understood that the retriever needed a place to belong, just like Evelyn had. She sat on the floor beside them, a blanket draped over her legs, a mug of tea warming her hands. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the occasional rustling of leaves outside her window. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about the wedding. Wasn't thinking about Nathan. Wasn't thinking about the life she had almost stepped into. She was just here, present. And that, in itself, felt like a victory. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were spent at the shelter, helping with the endless list of tasks that kept the place running. She cleaned kennels, restocked food, played with the more anxious dogs who needed extra attention. In the afternoons, she walked Ranger and Lucky through the park, letting them stretch their legs while she breathed in the crisp autumn air. She had always thought she needed a plan, a structured future mapped out perfectly in front of her. But now, she realized she didn't have to have everything figured out all at once. She just needed to keep moving forward. One afternoon, as she was finishing up at the shelter, she noticed Maria watching her with an amused expression. "What?" Evelyn asked, brushing stray dog hair off her sweater. Maria grinned. "You know you're here more than some of the staff, right?" Evelyn laughed, shaking her head. "I guess I just like it here." Maria tilted her head. "Have you ever thought about making it official?" Evelyn blinked. "Official?" "Working here," Maria said. "You're already doing the hard part. Why not make it a job?" The thought hadn't occurred to her. She had always assumed this was temporary, a way to fill the space left behind by everything that had unraveled. But as she considered Maria's words, something settled inside her. This wasn't just a distraction. It was something she genuinely loved. She exhaled, a small smile forming. "You know what?" she said. "I think I'd like that." Maria grinned. "Good, because I was going to offer you a position anyway." That night, Evelyn sat on her balcony, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Lucky dozed at her feet, while Ranger sat beside her, his ears twitching at the distant sounds of the city. She sipped from her cup of tea, letting the warmth settle inside her. A few months ago, she had been preparing to marry a man she didn't really know. She had been living a life that, in hindsight, had never truly belonged to her. But now she had something real. Something built on her own choices. She glanced down at Ranger, scratching behind his ears. "You knew before I did," she murmured. "Didn't you?" Ranger huffed, his tail thumping lightly against the floor. Evelyn smiled. "Yeah, I should have listened sooner." She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare her. It excited her. Thanks for watching. If you loved this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more great stories like this one. Tell us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share this video with your friends and family so they can enjoy it too. There's plenty more amazing stories waiting for you, so stick around and keep exploring. See you in the next videos.